Welcome in. I am so incredibly glad you are joining us for this custom-tailored deep dive today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. We have a really intense topic to get into.
We really do. We are pulling from a fascinating and honestly mind-bending source article titled The Oppenheimer Moment.
Right, how the Pentagon fractured the AI industry and triggered the great exodus of 2026.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you have been following the tech space over the last few years, you probably know that the leading minds in Silicon Valley operated under this almost utopian assumption.
Oh, absolutely. There was this widespread, deeply held belief that artificial general intelligence, AGI, was destined to be an inherently democratic thing,
Right, strictly civilian technology.
a tool for the everyday person.
Yeah, but, well, that illusion shattered into a million pieces over a single, highly dramatic 72-hour period.
Late February of 2026.
It is a rude awakening for the entire industry.
Truly. We are looking at a fundamental shift in how global power, bleeding-edge technology, and, quite frankly, corporate philosophy all just collide. Because this isn't a story about consumer chatbots writing your emails anymore.
Or generating dinner recipes.
Right, exactly. We are talking about the rapid, completely unprecedented militarization of the world's most powerful enterprise infrastructure.
Which brings us to our mission for today's deep dive. We're going to unpack this comprehensive source article and help you understand exactly how that transition happened.
How did we get from a helpful, everyday assistant to a militarized weapon of the state?
And more importantly, how did it happen in just 3 days?
The text lays out the whole timeline, the intense ideological stances taken by these massive tech companies.
And the very aggressive strategic maneuvers deployed by the Trump administration during this period.
The sheer speed of the escalation is what makes this so critical to understand.
It really is. Now, before we get too deep into the weeds, I do want to do a quick political neutrality check for you listening.
Good call.
The sources we are working from today contain some politically charged actions from the Trump administration.
And obviously some very strong ideological stances from the tech companies themselves.
Right. But our goal for this deep dive is strictly to report the facts neutrally.
We are not taking any sides here.
Exactly. We are not endorsing any viewpoints. We are just breaking down the original source materials so you can understand what actually happened.
Just following the timeline.
Okay, let's unpack this. Part 1 of our source document takes us back to early 2026.
Right.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth initiates this massive, sweeping push to integrate generative AI deeply into secure defense networks.
The Pentagon is looking to drastically improve mission readiness.
Yeah, but they do not want to build this from scratch.
No, absolutely not. They want unrestricted access to the absolute most advanced models currently sitting in the commercial sector.
They are no longer viewing large language models as just, software subscriptions.
They are looking at them as critical national defense infrastructure.
Exactly. And the military wasn't asking for a specialized, walled-off version of these tools either.
Right. They wanted the raw, bleeding edge of what the commercial sector had already spent billions developing.
They wanted the engines driving the civilian tech boom.
Which brings the Pentagon directly to Anthropic.
The makers of the Claude AI models.
Yeah.
The source notes that the Pentagon approached Anthropic with a highly lucrative $200 million defense contract.
And you have to understand the scale of Anthropic at this point.
I was reading through the context provided in the article, and it is just staggering. They had a valuation of $380 billion.
Massive.
And they were sitting on a $30 billion war chest.
It's an absolute titan of industry.
Yet when the Pentagon slides a $200 million deal across the table, Anthropic turns them down.
Flat out refuses.
Right. And understanding the why behind that refusal is really the key to unlocking the entire sequence of events that follows.
Anthropic, as an organization, was founded by a group of former OpenAI researchers.
People who left their previous company specifically to prioritize safety and ethical alignment.
Yeah, that cautious approach isn't just a marketing slogan for them. It is their foundational DNA.
So when the Pentagon came calling, Anthropic drew some very strict, non-negotiable red lines.
Regarding how their Claude models could be deployed.
The source outlines 2 specific red lines they flat out would not cross.
First, they explicitly prohibited their models from being used for the mass domestic surveillance of American citizens.
And second, they prohibited the development of fully autonomous lethal weapons.
Which is a huge sticking point for the military.
Just to clarify that second point for you, that means they refuse to allow their AI to be integrated into weapons systems that can fire or engage targets without a human being actively in the decision loop.
The military looked at those stipulations and essentially demanded those prohibitions be removed.
They wanted unrestricted utility.
But when the Pentagon refused to budge, Anthropic refused to yield on its core constitutional principles.
They simply walked away from the table.
Which catapults us right into part 2 of the source document.
The absolute firestorm that followed.
The political retaliation against Anthropic was incredibly swift.
Oh, yeah. On February 27, 2026, the Trump administration took the extreme step of formally designating Anthropic as a supply chain risk to national security.
They officially blacklisted the company from all government work.
What's fascinating here is the specific terminology the administration utilized.
The supply chain risk designation.
Yeah, that is a profoundly draconian lever.
It is a label historically reserved for foreign, state-backed adversaries.
Think of international telecom giants like Huawei or ZTE.
Where the primary concern is literal foreign espionage.
Right, so applying this label to a domestic American tech giant was a massive watershed moment in regulatory action.
The source actually calls it the contractual equivalent of nuclear war for the enterprise sector.
I want to dwell on that for a second because it sounds like hyperbole, but it really isn't.
Not at all.
Imagine you are a mid-level procurement officer or an enterprise architect at a logistics company on a Friday afternoon.
Your company holds a federal contract to ship military supplies.
The moment that blacklist hits, you are now legally barred from integrating Anthropic's API into your tech stack.
If you already use Claude for your back-end operations, your entire infrastructure is suddenly out of compliance with federal law.
It acts as an immediate contagion.
Exactly. This maneuver didn't just cut Anthropic off from a single defense contract.
It threatened their entire commercial footprint overnight.
The text highlights that Anthropic had over 300,000 enterprise partnerships at that exact moment.
300,000. This government edict threw hundreds of thousands of corporate architectures into total chaos.
And it cast a massive existential shadow over Anthropic's highly anticipated 2026 IPO plans.
The state effectively weaponized federal contracting compliance.
It is an unbelievable show of force.
But while Anthropic is taking this massive financial and structural hit, another player steps onto the board.
Part 3 of our source details what it calls the Midnight Maneuver.
Just hours after Anthropic is publicly blacklisted on February 27, OpenAI swoops in.
The timing is wild.
They signed an exclusive deal with the Pentagon to deploy their models on classified military networks.
And the optics of this sequence of events were just catastrophic. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman publicly claimed they had secured the exact same ethical safeguards that Anthropic had requested.
However, the reality of the contract, which quickly leaked, painted a drastically different picture.
I was reading the exact phrasing from the source, and the agreement OpenAI signed permitted the military to use their technology for any lawful purpose.
That specific legal phrasing is key. It shifted the entire burden of ethical limitation completely away from OpenAI as the vendor.
And placed it entirely onto the military's own internal compliance departments.
So to the public eye, it looked like OpenAI was eagerly capturing government funds and capitalizing on a rival's principled stand.
Right. At the exact moment, that rival is being actively punished by the administration.
Now, tech companies make back-end defense deals all the time.
Yeah, they do.
And they rarely face immediate, quantifiable public backlash because that infrastructure is invisible to the average user. Nobody uninstalls an app because of a cloud computing contract.
But this situation broke the mold entirely.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The consumer backlash was historic.
The source dubs it the cancel ChatGPT movement.
Everyday users revolted, perceiving this maneuver as a massive betrayal of OpenAI's original humanity-first mission.
I was looking at the metrics from the weekend of February 28, and they absolutely blew my mind.
We aren't just talking about a trending hashtag or angry social media post.
No, we are talking about a massive, quantifiable consumer flight.
The raw data from that weekend illustrates a severe break in consumer trust. Let's look at the uninstall surge.
Okay.
U.S. uninstalls of the ChatGPT mobile app skyrocketed by an unbelievable 295% day over day.
And to give you some context on why that number is so wild, the source notes that prior to this deal, ChatGPT averaged a standard baseline daily uninstall rate of just 9%.
That's just normal app churn.
Right. But by March 3, that daily average had climbed 200% compared to the previous 30 days.
That is a staggering hemorrhage of active users for a platform of that scale.
People were actively ripping the software off their devices.
And they were making sure OpenAI knew exactly why they were doing it.
The app was flooded with a 775% spike in one-star reviews.
775%. Users were explicitly citing ethical concerns and their opposition to the Pentagon partnership right in the text of their reviews.
They were actively migrating en masse.
And where were they going?
They migrated directly to the competitor that had just stood up to the Pentagon.
The ethical martyr.
Exactly.
Right.
Consumers actively rewarded Anthropic's defiance.
The numbers validate that completely. On February 28 alone, Anthropic's Claude experienced a 51% influx in new users.
That surge rapidly propelled the app to the absolute #1 top spot in category rankings on the U.S. Apple App Store.
It is a perfect real-time example of the public voting with their wallets and their downloads.
Yeah. Now, the external backlash was severe, but what was happening inside the walls of these tech giants was arguably even more disruptive.
Which brings us to the internal mutiny within Silicon Valley.
A crucial element of the timeline.
Part 4 of our source dives into this. The speed and the perceived secrecy of OpenAI's defense pact triggered a massive fracture in the internal culture of elite engineering teams.
The text draws a direct parallel here to the 2018 Google Project Maven protests.
You really have to consider the psychology of the workforce here.
These are specialized researchers who genuinely dedicated their lives to building artificial intelligence for the betterment of humanity.
Suddenly, they find themselves alienated by executive suites that appear increasingly eager to secure billions in defense funding.
Even if it means stripping away ethical guardrails just to get the signature on the dotted line.
Over 220 employees, spanning across both Google and OpenAI, signed a public petition titled, "We Will Not Be Divided."
They vehemently opposed the military application of their AI research.
They voiced profound discomfort with the Trump administration's aggressive negotiation tactics.
And they openly expressed solidarity with Anthropic's safety-first posture.
Consider the immense pressure mounting on OpenAI at this specific moment.
They are bleeding active users.
Their public image is being battered in the press.
And their own top-tier talent, the people who actually build the models, are openly revolting.
It results in a highly public scramble.
By Monday, March 2,
just mere days after the initial Friday deal,
OpenAI announces it is hastily amending its Pentagon contract.
CEO Sam Altman takes to the social media platform X for a highly publicized mea culpa.
He admits the Friday deal was rushed.
I have the quote right here. He said, "We were genuinely trying to de-escalate things and avoid a much worse outcome, but I think it just looked opportunistic and sloppy."
Calling your own massive defense contract opportunistic and sloppy is quite a rare admission from a chief executive of that stature.
The concessions they made in the amendment were incredibly significant.
The revised agreement explicitly added stronger language to bar the intentional use of OpenAI models for the mass domestic surveillance of American citizens.
If you are keeping track of the timeline, that is the exact clause Anthropic had demanded from the very beginning.
Altman also hosted an emergency all-hands meeting
and publicly urged the Pentagon not to punish Anthropic, expressing hope that the military would offer Claude the same revised terms OpenAI had just secured.
Despite the rapid backtrack, the source notes that the permanent damage to their reputation was already done.
The public had witnessed a company willing to compromise its core tenets for market dominance,
only reversing course when the financial and internal pressure became completely unbearable.
So what does this all mean?
That is the big question.
If you are listening to this right now, how does this one weekend in February 2026 actually change your reality?
Right. What are the practical takeaways if you are an everyday user or an enterprise IT leader trying to build out a corporate network?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it represents a total seismic shift in the industry.
The AI market is no longer defined strictly by technical specifications.
We used to evaluate these models based on latency, parameter count, or context windows.
That era is over.
The market is now strictly partitioned by geopolitical risk and federal compliance.
We are seeing the total bifurcation of the tech stack into two distinct ecosystems.
The text breaks those two ecosystems down very clearly. First, you have the defense-aligned stack.
This includes players like OpenAI and Microsoft.
The pros of this ecosystem: deep federal integration, massive military contracts, guaranteed recurring revenue streams.
And absolute safety from government blacklists.
Up at the cons, they carry the heavy baggage of consumer mistrust, severely damaged public sentiment.
And they face the constant threat of internal engineering friction or talent drain.
On the other side of the divide, you have the civilian ethical stack.
embodied by Anthropic.
The pros here are compelling for the public. They champion ethical AI, they win the consumer trust battle.
They dominate consumer productivity rankings, and they attract top safety-conscious talent who deeply align with that high morale mission.
The cons, however, are brutal.
They are actively blacklisted from government work.
They face existential threats from arbitrary government regulation.
And they are entirely locked out of massive sectors of the enterprise economy.
The source outlines some intense strategic implications for IT leaders who are now forced to navigate this divided reality.
The primary concern is something called supply chain contagion.
The blacklisting of Anthropic proved definitively that vendor selection is now a literal national security issue.
If you are an enterprise architect building systems for logistics, telecommunications, or finance, you must completely audit your downstream clients.
Because, as we touched on earlier, if a subcontractor uses Claude, your entire operation could be locked out of Department of Defense contracts.
Full stop. It completely changes how companies procure software.
It introduces a concept the source calls compliance over capability, which I found to be one of the most alarming takeaways.
The text quotes industry analysts who note that a compliance-first vendor strategy actually defeats ethical autonomy in government AI procurement.
Let's break down what that means in practice.
It means that enterprise IT departments might literally be forced to adopt inferior or frankly less safe models simply because those specific models hold the requisite federal clearances.
You aren't buying the most capable tool for the job anymore.
No, you are buying the tool that won't get your company slapped with a supply chain risk designation.
To combat that, the source stresses that vendor lock-in is a catastrophic danger.
Agility is the only way to survive. Multi-cloud and multi-model architectures are no longer just best practices.
They are mandatory.
Relying solely on a single foundation model exposes an enterprise to massive risk.
If your chosen vendor suddenly runs afoul of the administration or gets hit with a blacklist, you need to be able to swap out that intelligence engine overnight without taking your entire company offline.
You cannot build your company's foundation on a single technology stack when the government has proven it can effectively outlaw that stack over a weekend.
It really marks the end of innocent AI.
It definitely does.
The events of the great exodus of 2026 prove that AGI cannot be developed in a commercial vacuum, somehow immune to the gravitational pull of the military-industrial complex.
The government has shown it will leverage supply chain blacklists against domestic companies.
And it will not tolerate conscientious objectors in the AI arms race.
Meanwhile, the mass consumer exodus from ChatGPT proves the public is acutely aware of the ethical stakes.
People are willing to leverage their wallets and their downloads to vote for safety and autonomy.
This raises an important question. If the domestic U.S. enterprise AI market is now entirely fractured by these intense bureaucratic purity tests and geopolitical blacklists, does this practically hand global AI dominance over to adversarial nations?
Well, yeah.
Or, even more unpredictably, does this rigid compliance over capability environment spark the rise of a massive unregulated underground open source market?
Because if the best technology is bogged down by federal red tape,
Developers might just bypass the corporate titans altogether and build frontier models in the shadows where no government blacklist can reach them.
that is an incredibly provocative angle to consider.
The fracturing of the commercial market might just supercharge the open source Wild West.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems you use every day. Keep paying attention to where your data is going, and we will catch you next time.